I'm Dr. Kristen R. Bromley. This video series, which is part of my online music academy, specifically accompanies Note Reading Book 3 from my Method book series. Like all my books, this selection is available to purchase through Amazon and Google Play. For help, see the links in the description below. In the videos which are part of this specific course, I progress through the lessons in Note Reading Book 3, explaining and demonstrating concepts and playing each of the songs and exercises contained therein, so you can hear how they sound and play them right along with me. You are of course welcome to view these videos with or without the book, but with the book you can work through all the songs and exercises, and in the process come to know the entire fretboard and master the skill of playing written notes all along the neck. Alright, let's get to jamming in this lesson. Hi, I'm Dr. Kristen Bromley. Welcome back. This video goes with Lesson 19 in Note Reading Book 3. We're going to be working on the keys of B flat major and G minor. So we've got two flats in the key signature, B flat and E flat. Let's go ahead and dive in. So we're going to start on page 158. We're looking at exercise number 1, which is for the B flat major scale. Now in this range, there are two ways that we can play it. We can use our middle finger, scale form 1, starting on the B flat that's at the 6th fret of the 6th string. Or alternatively, we could use scale form 2, where we start with our pinky on that B flat, 6th fret, 6th string. So we can read this exercise with either one of those or both of those. I'm going to go ahead and do it with scale form 1. So here we go. 1 and 2 and ready and go and... Okay, now with quarter note triplets like we have in that first measure of the third line at a slow tempo like this, they're kind of hard to play and they're sort of excruciatingly long. And I wouldn't worry about it too much. When you get into faster tempos, then they make sense and they sort of work in great ways. But at these slower tempos, as we're sight reading and as you getting used to finding these notes, as you speed it up, finding those will be a little bit easier. And if they're not quite 1,000% or even 100% accurate on just how long they're holding them. I wouldn't stress over it too much. But working with a metronome on all these things can help you find those placements. Okay, let's go on over to page 159 and we'll do the next octave up. So with this octave, we've got the B flat that's at the 13th fret on the 5th string, and I can play scale form 1, so starting with my middle finger on that note, or scale form 2, starting with my pinky on that note. Off the 4th string, we also have the B flat starting with my middle finger on that 8th fret. Or I could do scale form 2 starting with my pinky on that B flat at the 8th fret. And then I could also play this off the 3rd string with my index or middle finger on the 3rd fret of the 3rd string. I've got scale form 1 there. So I can play exercise 2 with all those scales. I'm just going to go ahead and play it with scale form 2 off the 4th string with that root at the 8th fret. So I'm in 5th position. Change it up a little bit with scale form 2, but you can practice it in all those ways, and that's a great thing to do. Okay, so here you go. 1 and 2 and ready and go and... Okay, and exercise 3 is up one more octave, and this one's just a little bit insane. Some of you, if you're playing on an acoustic guitar, might not even be able to reach these notes. But in the 15th position, we have scale form 1, and we can play exercise 3 there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So you're going to have 1 and 2 and ready and go and... Okay, and we'll flip on over to page 160, work on these minor scale exercises now. So with number 4, we got the G minor scale, and in this range, we got scale form 1, index finger on that G that's at the 3rd fret of the 6th string. We got scale form 1 there. And in this range, that's the only one that we can play. So I'm going to go ahead and play it there. We've got a few 16th notes, so I'm going to take it just a little bit slower. So we're going to have 1 E and 2 E and ready, E and go, E and Now, that might have seemed super slow through those different eighth notes, but you can also work on it and speed it up. It's great to work on these things where you can play them accurately and then speed them up. Slow is fast, so when we learn things slow and accurately and then we gradually move up, we actually learn things faster and develop our ability better, which is something I've probably said before. Let's go ahead and look at the next octave then. So, with the next octave, we've got our index finger at the 10th fret of the 5th string, and we can play scale form 1. Alternatively, if you put your pinky there, we can play scale form 2. So we can read this one in those spots. On the 4th string, I've got my index finger on the 5th fret. We can play scale form 1. Or Alternatively, we could put our pinky there and play scale form 2. And those are the places that we have this for this range. I'm going to go ahead and play it in 5th position. So my index finger is on the 5th fret of the 4th string, and I'm going to play it there. So we're going to have 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, and we have one more octave. So over on page 161, we've got, you can put our index finger on the 12th fret of the 3rd string, and we've got scale form 1 there. So go ahead and read that there. So we're going to have 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, and we'll go on and do these positional forms now. So we're starting in second position or third position. We're starting with the G minor scale exercise, so number 7. Now, with this one, you could go ahead and play the scale in this position. Find all those notes. I'm going to go ahead and play this one. Now, we got some 16th notes, so I'm going to again count it off kind of slow. 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, and we'll flip on over to page 162 and do the G major scale exercise in this position. So, if you want to review it from the major scale side, you can, but it's the same notes in the same position. So we've got just a few 16th notes. I'm going to take it just a little bit faster though. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, ready E and a, go E and a. Alright, let's go on over to page 163 and do some melodies, starting with No Irish Need Apply. Now with this one, there is an accidental in the third line, fourth measure. There's an E natural. The easiest way to catch that is with your index finger on that second fret of the fourth string. So it'll be the easiest way to grab that. This one's in 6/8 time. We come in on 2 and in the pickup measure. I'll give us 1 and we'll be in. Okay, here we go. 1 and okay, and we'll go on to number 10, that Big Rock Candy Mountain. I'll give us a 3-beat count and we'll catch 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. Okay, we'll flip on over to page 164 and we'll be in the next position. So we're in position 5. So starting with the B flat major scale, we got our middle finger on the 6th fret at that 6th string. Playing that major scale right there. We're in 6/8 time with this one, so I'll give us a 1 and 2 and in the count up. 1 and 2 and Alright, let's go over to page 165 and do number 12, the G minor scale exercise there in position 5. You may want to run the scale from the minor side if that helps you out. So we're going to go 1 and 2 and ready and go and... Okay, number 13, Pop Goes the Weasel. So, we'll go about there. 1, 2, ready, and... Okay, let's flip on over to page 166. We've got Hazelnut, and we'll do that one. So you're going to have 1 and 2 and 3 and... Okay, and that one actually sounds better, a little bit faster, as a lot of these do, but in this sight reading mode I'm taking them a little slower so I don't bury ya. Oleana, number 15. We're in 2/4 time. We're going to go 1 and 2 and... Okay, and we're on to the next position, position 7 and 8, starting with the B flat major scale exercise with number 16 there, the bottom, or towards the bottom half of page 166. So, middle finger on that 8th fret of the 4th string for the B flat major scale. At this point I figure you're kind of familiar with these scales, so I haven't been talking you through them, but we start with scale form 1 on that one, and we've got pieces of scale form 2 on the higher end and the lower end of the range in this position. We're going to go 1 and 2 and ready and go and... we'll do number 17, so the G minor scale in that position. So that G with our pinky at the 10th fret. You can play that scale through from there if you need to. We're going to go 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, we can go on to page 168 and do these melodies in this position, starting with number 18, Charity. Now with this one, there is an E natural accidental. And in this position, for the lower octave one, the easiest place to catch that is at the 7th fret of the 5th string. And for the higher one, you can catch it at the 9th fret on that 3rd string. So you want to watch for those on the first line and the last line. We're in 3/4 time. We'll go 3, 1, 2 in the pickup, and we'll be off. 3, 1, 2. Okay, and Lux Benigna, I'm not exactly sure how to say that, but will be kind of an interesting time signature. We've done this on occasion in 3/2. You can just count, if you want to, the quarter notes, count to 6. Think of it like it's in 6/4. You can also just count the quarter notes like they're eighth notes, and think of it as being in 3/4 that way, only the quarter note is the eighth note in our counting, and the half note would be the quarter note, and so on. I'm going to count it with the quarter note 6. I'm going to give 6 sort of counts. I think that's the easiest. So I'm not going to count all 6 because we come in on the 4th quarter note in that pickup measure. So I'm just going to give us 1, 2, 3, and we'll be in. So you got 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's go on and do number 20. My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. I'm going to give 3, 1, 2 as the count off will catch beat 3 in that pickup measure. 3, 1, 2. Okay, go on over to page 169. We are in the 10th position now. So pinky on that B flat on the 5th string at the 13th fret. And we'll do number 21. So we're going to go 1 and 2 and ready and go and... Okay, we'll flip on over to page 170 and do the minor exercise in this position. So you can run that scale if you need to. And we'll go 1 and 2 and ready and go and... Okay, and we'll look at number 23, the Wabash Cannonball. I'm going to give us a 3-beat counting. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and Waltzing Matilda. 1 and 2 and ready and go and... Okay, and King's Fold. 1 and 2 and 3 and... Okay, so we'll go on to this next position, which is 12 and 13. For in B flat, our middle finger's on the B flat at the 13th fret of the 5th string. We're starting out with the G minor scale exercise though, so our pinky is going to be on that G at the 15th fret of the 6th string. And if you need to play through that scale, you can. And we'll go ahead and play this exercise. 1 and 2 and 3 and... Okay, and we'll go on over to page 172 and do the major scale exercise in that position. So for B flat major, we'll go 1 and 2 and 3 and... we'll go over and do the melodies, starting with God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, page 173, number 28. Give us 3-beat count and we'll catch beat 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and Einklein Night Music. So we go 1, 2, ready, and. Okay, so let's go on to page 174 and we'll do 900 miles. I'll give us 3, 4, 1, 2. And we'll be in with beat 3 in that pickup measure. 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, and we'll go on now to the double octave exercises. We're going to work on shifting between the two forms. And I should say any two forms, really. Now, when I work on these, I'm going to do it where I'm just using one option. But in lessons 9 through 11, I went through multiple different ways that you can do shifting and kind of explored that more extensively. And you can do that same sort of thing with this lesson. You can use it with these double octave exercises here at the end of the lesson. You can also go back and use previous exercises and songs and practice them. Start in positions other than the ones specified for the original way that we were working on it, and then shift as needed because the range has gone out of the position that you're in, or because it would finger better in another spot. Those are kind of the reasons that we end up shifting when we're sight reading music in whatever setting that we're playing it in. So I'm going to go on here though and do the G minor exercise. And I'm just going to use, in this range, scale form 1 down here in 3rd position is the only way we can play this, the low part. So index finger on that G at the 3rd fret of the 6th string. I have scale form 1. And then if I shift up to 5th position on that string, that 4th string at the 5th fret, I've got scale form 1 again. And that's what I'm going to use to play this exercise. Okay, here we go. 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, and we'll do the next exercise. So we'll go up the octave. So with this one, I'm going to go ahead and go up, put my index finger on the 10th fret of the 5th string. I got scale form 1, and then up to the 12th position, or 12th fret with my index, I've got scale form 1 again. And we'll read number 32 with that one. So you're going to have 1 E and 2 E and ready E and go E and Okay, let's go on to number 33, and we'll do House of the Rising Sun. So we'll get to practice a little bit with an actual melody that might be familiar to us. Now with this one, I'm going to use that same scale form 1 in 10th position, and then I'm going to go up and use the 1 in 12th and 13th position. So same thing we've been practicing here. With this melody though, it's going to go outside of that range a little bit on the low end. When we were playing the positional form in 10th position, that's no problem. We're used to coming down and catching the notes on the 6th string. We're going to need that D, we're going to need to come down. This one also has an F sharp accidental note, and that F sharp goes outside of the range. So on that second line towards the end there, we actually come down to an F sharp, which is at the 9th fret, and then catch the D. So that's going to be outside of the range of the 2-octave strict scale forms that we've been working here with the shifting, but it's inside of what we've practiced before and what we know, and that's no problem. So we're going to watch for that. You're going to be coming down. We're going to have that in that octave, and then in the higher octave we're actually going to have F sharp as well. So we're going to catch that at the 11th fret on the 3rd string, so a little accidental in there as well. Okay, here we go. I'll give us 3, 1, 2, and we'll be in 3, 1, 2. Okay, and we'll flip on over to page 176, and we'll work on the major scale with some shifting. So, with number 34, exercise 19, I've got my B flat major scale, form 1, middle finger on the 6th fret of the 6th string, and scale form 1 there. And then I can go up to the 7th position, but my middle finger's on the 8th fret, scale form 1 again. So, I'm going to practice that way. Of course, you can use lots of the different ways that were introduced in lessons 9 through 11. For any of these, lesson 9 introduced the major scale ones. Okay, we'll go ahead and do this. So we're going to have 1 and 2 and ready and go and... and we'll do number 35. So we're going to do this up the octave. This one gets a little bit high, but that's all right. It's good times. So we've got the B flat. I'm going to play with scale form 1. They're in 12th position, so my middle finger is on the B flat at the 13th fret, and then clear up at the 15th fret. We've got scale form 1 again. So it's the high one. Some of your guitars, if you're doing this on an acoustic, reaching that might be impossible. With this particular archtop guitar, it's a little tight, but I still have that in my range. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one though. 1 and 2 and ready and go and... Okay, and that wraps us up for this lesson. So yes, we've finished the key of B flat. Hope you're having fun, hope you're doing well. Take care, and we'll see you again. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. For help with other guitar playing skills, check out more of my method books and the numerous lessons available as part of my online academy here on YouTube. You can find more information about me and my products at kristenbromley.com. Take care.